Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating by Vietdak, an in-depth analysis of the Q1 2026 Vietnam pepper export report. We are going to unpack the wildly unpredictable market dynamics of the global pepper trade right now. Let's get right into it.
Let me start by posing a question that absolutely should be on every supply chain strategist's mind today. How exactly does a relatively small enterprise manage to far exceed the overall industry's growth by 1.6 times, all while the biggest, most established giants in the space are actually stumbling? What we are looking at here is a classic David versus Goliath underdog story, and the Q1 data, well, it gives us the exact playbook on how an agile challenger is winning against some truly massive odds.
Okay, let's dive into this macro paradox. Section 1, growing demand, shrinking supply.
53,256. That is the massive total export volume in tons for the Vietnam Pepper and Spice Association in just the first quarter of 2026 alone. To put that into perspective, that's a massive 25.8% increase from the exact same period last year. Now, on paper, if you just glance at that, it looks like a thriving, booming sector with infinite raw materials just waiting to be shipped out. But as you'll see, the reality on the ground is way more complex than that single top-line number suggests.
We are, quite literally, heading right toward an impending crisis. On one side of the equation, we've got roaring, recovering international demand. This is primarily driven by massive economic consumption engines like the US and China. But on the flip side, global supply isn't even close to matching that pace. It's actually dropping by a severe estimated 15 to 20%. So what we have is surging demand smashing directly into a massive supply shortage wall.
This creates an immediate industry-wide paradigm shift. Competition has fundamentally shifted from simply selling to outright fighting for raw materials. It's exactly like a high-stakes game of musical chairs. Think about it. For years, these global giants focused entirely on who could sell the most chairs. Now, the music has abruptly stopped, and they are suddenly fighting tooth and nail just to find a seat, scrambling to secure enough raw material just to keep their hungry supply chains running.
So who's actually winning this chaotic game? Section 2, the competitor landscape, giants versus the agile.
Breaking down the market, we can clearly see three distinct tiers. Up in the top tier, you have your lumbering, capital-heavy FDI giants, companies like Fuxing, Olam, and Nedspice. Sure, they have massive global supply chains and deep pockets, but their growth is incredibly uneven right now. Some are barely growing, some are literally shrinking. Then, in the middle, the mid-tier players like Simexco and Pearl Group are fighting super hard, seeing solid 20 to 60% growth, but they are still heavily dependent on that shrinking raw material pool. Finally, down at the bottom, we've got the high-growth micro-tier. These are players like Huang Qingan or Sunrise INS, and they're experiencing explosive, mind-boggling growth, anywhere from 300 to over 1,000%. But honestly, make no mistake here, those spikes are incredibly unstable. They're driven by volatile market anomalies and sudden niche grabs, not a solid, sustainable foundation.
Which brings us to the most fascinating part of our analysis, Section 3, the Vietdak anomaly. Let's zoom in on our agile challenger.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Vietdak's position. Look at that. They're sitting at a very healthy 42.7% growth rate, completely outpacing the industry average by roughly 1.6 times. Meanwhile, a top-tier giant like Nedspice actually took a hit, experiencing a volume decline of 2.3%. It just goes to show you, in a resource-scarce environment, having the biggest factories in the world doesn't mean a thing if you can't feed them. Vietdak is clearly doing something incredibly right to secure their materials.
Now, you might look at their total volume, 214 tons exported this quarter, and think, well, okay, that's just a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the 4,000 or 5,000 tons those giants are pushing out. But here's the kicker. That volume represents something much, much more valuable. It's pure, sustainable, organic growth. They aren't shrinking like the big guys, but they also aren't relying on dangerous volatility or lucky one-off anomalous orders like the micro-tier companies. It is calculated, steady, and just incredibly effective momentum.
So, how are they doing it? Let's crack it open. Section 4, Decoding Real Growth, the Secret Sauce.
Remember that musical chairs analogy we talked about earlier? Well, in a market where everyone is desperately fighting for a seat, Vietdak basically brought their own chair. They flat out refuse to rely entirely on the chaotic open market. Instead, their huge advantage lies in a highly flexible supply chain, one that balances domestic sourcing with really strategic imports to bridge any gaps. On top of that, they've cultivated deeply stable raw material relationships, and they keep a laser focus on high-value niches where you don't need massive volume to turn a great profit. They literally engineered agility right into their operational DNA.
So, the crucial point here is the stark contrast in risk profiles as we look forward. Compare them to the broader market, which is dealing with severely uneven stability and extremely high material risk thanks to that massive 15 to 20% global supply drop we covered. Vietdak, on the other hand, boasts incredibly stable growth. They maintain significantly lower material risk, and it's precisely because of that flexible, niche-focused infrastructure that shields them from those massive broader market shocks.
Section 5. The strategic horizon. Let's zoom back out and see what's next.
And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible position an agile company finds itself in when it actually prioritizes stability. Right now, Vietdak faces two distinct, highly strategic choices. Pathway 1, they can leverage this perfectly positioned organic growth to scale up their volume over the next year or two, firmly entrenching themselves up into the upper mid-tier. Or, Pathway 2, they can pivot deep into traceable, organic, high-value niches, basically bypassing those brutal volume wars entirely to focus on premium margins. Either way, because of the solid foundation they've built, they hold all the cards.
It's such a fascinating case study, really, because it forces us to look at the entire agricultural export supply chain completely differently. I want to leave you with this. In an era of global shortages and fierce, chaotic competition for raw materials, is massive scale really still the only advantage? Or is targeted agility the true key to survival and dominance? Let that sink in as you review your own market strategies. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.